Welcome, everyone. I am Samantha Williams, the current entrepreneur in residence, EIR, at the New Haven Free Public Library. That position is open also, so if you're interested, contact Colleen or Gina.
It's going to be due on August 20th, so it's coming up. We want as many people as possible to apply, and you can get all the information on our website or on our social media posts.
Yes, so check that out. And as the EIR, I host office hours Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 4 for entrepreneurs and small and small to mid-sized business owners with any questions they may have, seeking advice, or just need to vent. I am available. That link is on the library's website. Also, as the EIR, we host weekly presentations for the small business community. So today we have Randy McCray and we have James Rawlins, and they are our small business experts today to help you get through this pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you could give me host control, I can share the presentations.
Yes.
I think it went
Sorry
to
about
James.
that.
No, I think it went to James, and then it went back to you.
All right.
So if you
make
to me,
co-hosts, yes, make
awesome.
co-hosts. So you're both going to be co-hosts, so you should be allowed to do everything. And
all
I
right,
can,
sounds
yeah,
good.
there you go.
And so I'm just gonna bring this up, and I'll actually let James start. So James, do you want to start? Because they've met me before, so.
Yeah, and
Sure.
introduce yourself so we know who you are.
Sure. So my name is James Rawlins. I've worked with Randy for a number of years, working at Yale at that point in time. Since that time, I spent a lot of my energy going back and focusing on issues around strategy and management. I am a data scientist, and so I've spent a lot of time as well working with entrepreneurs in some various areas: restaurant owners, technology startups, and just happened to learn a lot from those experiences. But I couple my background in technology, in business strategy, and data analytics, and I try to put it in a way to help provide insights to business owners, whether they be entrepreneurs, small to mid-sized companies, large corporations. And so that's been my focus as of late. I really enjoy what I'm doing at this point in time. And this particular topic that has developed is really based on a presentation that Randy and I gave some years ago. And we sort of revamped it a bit because there's a lot of interest around how do business owners sort of rebound, if you will, and navigate in times like this, the pandemic. Unprecedented times, things that we just never experienced. Actually, we had back in 1918, but many of us were not around at that point in time. And so in thinking about how do you stay afloat as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, is really, really important right now, because it has fundamentally changed the way in which you have to think if you're going to be a thriving business in this time and going forward. So that's a little bit about me. Randy, do you want me to kind of kick into this, or do you want to say a few words?
I'll briefly share that. So what
James, can I ask a question really quick?
Sure.
Sorry, I just had a question. So are you mostly local, or do you reach outside of the area?
Yes and yes. Working on getting more exposure locally, and through my research, looking to expand that regionally and nationally.
So I am Randy McCray, as James mentioned. One of the things I didn't talk about in our previous previous presentation is I did work at Yale for some time, and that is where I met James, and we worked on a series of projects there at the university, as well as since. So we have served in a role of supporting technology startups, small businesses, and also nonprofit organizations who are trying to either refine their offerings, adjust their offerings, or be more relevant to what's happening in the moment, right? And so we had presented this topic at a technology conference as it related to technology professionals, but having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, we realized how beneficial this can be to anyone who either has a small to mid-sized businesses business or is an entrepreneur who is an independent contractor, right? And thinking about being at this moment of in transition and what that looks like, you know, after the pandemic or during the pandemic. And so we thought that it would be a good opportunity to present this topic and adapt it a little bit to this audience. But it's definitely is the culmination of what we learned supporting small projects, doing some work at the university, as well as helping some startups. So I'm just going to go ahead and let James go on to the next part and talk about more specifically why this topic.
So why this topic? In thinking about the current conditions that we're living in and trying to survive in, right? It fundamentally changes the entire landscape. So as a small business owner, there are things that you might have been able to do very easily prior to the pandemic, but in the times currently, you just can't do, right? So we know that we had this shutdown, and that fundamentally threw everything, you know, out of kilter, right? And now we're trying to figure out how do we kind of move into this new space. Fortunately, with technology as evolved as it is, we've been able to really do well, so to speak, because we're not just totally isolated. So social media, the ability to use technologies like Zoom or Skype, right, allows you to stay connected, right? So this whole digital ecosystem, this digital world is available to us, right? And for the most part, it's become like the life's, you know, a lifeline for many of us, because without that, just imagine if you couldn't use social media, if you couldn't use computers, if you didn't have your cell phone, like where would you be? How would you be surviving? So we talk about the fact that we kind of lack that sort of interpersonal connection, but it's not as bad as it could be if we didn't have technology. So when we think about surviving, right, as a business owner, you're saying, okay, you have this offering, right? And you have a client base. That client base may be somewhat removed from you right now because maybe the way in which you might have provided your services might have been a bit tough. So I'll give an example of a hair salon or a barbershop, right? Individuals in that space, their primary way of conducting their business was literally in person, right? Folks come into their shop, they'll make appointments, they'll come sit down. There's this whole social environment going on when you're in there, right? So it's more than just getting your hair done or getting a haircut, right? There's other things that go along with that. So for that business owner, right, when things shut down, they had to really get creative, right?
Can I say my mom's hairdresser is like her therapist?
Yes. So a lot goes on, right? So when you think about, so for that business owner, they had to think about, okay, first you get that shock, right, where things are shut down and you're literally trying to figure out what are you going to do next, right? And that forced you to go into like this assessment kind of a phase where you're thinking about what's going on, and so. But it makes you think and pause because you get that shock, right? And you're trying to figure out how you're going to sort of recover, if you will, right? Which leads us into that first slide. And we think about, you know, why this topic, because we're trying to come up with ways that we can sort of navigate these times, because without that, right, then our future is very limited. So we want to be thinking about ways to be innovative, right? Thinking out of the box. All of these kind of buzzwords become really important right now, because without it, you will, you know, in essence, cease to exist. And that's not what you want to be as a business owner, right? So in our next slide, we talk about, you know, what that might look like.
Yeah. So before that, we wanted to kind of hear from others on the call. Like, how has the pandemic impacted your business or the services you offer? So I think I shared this with Sammy a couple of weeks ago, and to James's point, one of the things I did primarily before the pandemic as a fee-for-service business, if you will, is I go to organizations and deliver trainings. These trainings can take place over a day. They can take 2 days, or they can be 3 days, or they can be 5 days. And as soon as the pandemic hit, those stopped, right? All of those that I had that I had lined up straight through December all got canceled, because part of that role, I also used to go to school districts and do professional development days. And so all of those are not happening. And that is part of what contributes to, my income profile. So in that moment, I was sitting there like, okay, we're not going to do this, right? And so the question becomes, will I not be working at all until we can meet together in person again? Or do I make an adjustment? And so we wanted to hear from you all, like, how has the pandemic impacted your business or service? And you can feel free to share from the library as well, because I think the library is a good point of like how, a major entity that we rely on heavily has been impacted. So I just want, and I'm not sure if Anne-Marie is still on, but if Anne-Marie is on as well, it would be good for her to share as well. Like, how has the pandemic impacted you? So let's start with the library and then go to Sammy and then Anne-Marie.
Okay, so the library has been obviously impacted because we're a community center. We're all about people coming in, physical books. I mean, you can get ebooks absolutely from us. You can get a lot of services, but we're about programs. We're about computer usage. We're all about being there physically. So when we had to shut down, it was shocking for everyone. No one knew if we were going to keep our jobs, if we were going to still be able to operate virtually, and everyone just pivoted. It was crazy. It was so inspiring how much people were willing to work from home. They just got right online. Suddenly we were doing online programs. Sammy was part of that. She was like, all right, let's do it. I'll do my online calls. I don't have to have them come into the cafe and meet with me. And it was very different for some people that weren't technologically savvy, and they just sort of, we had a training committee give us like webinars to how to use Zoom and that kind of stuff. And just the amount of drive that people had in the pandemic was like shocking, and it was really inspiring. And so I'm actually a small business owner. I sell rare books, and that is what's weird is that I do on the side, and I sort of stopped it in the pandemic, even though it was all online. So it was like suddenly, I don't know if it was depression about the pandemic, or I could only think about the pandemic, or I was really focused on the library, but it was definitely affecting my business, even though mine was born online. So it affected everyone in different ways. And I think seeing the librarians pivot so well and get sort of like, we had a social media, I was doing a lot of the social media for the library, and suddenly we had a social media team because that was our only way to get to get to people and get our word out. And we became like a news source. So anything that was coming out of the city, we would share. Anything that was coming out, like people making masks, where to get masks, that kind of stuff. So we became really a place where people went to find that information, and we stepped up, and now we have a team of like 5 people that just learned how to make the graphics, learned how to use Facebook, learned how to do all this stuff just immediately. And so that just goes to show, like when this happens, people paused and had no idea what to expect. And then they just feet to the ground, like they just started running, and it was great.
Yeah. And as the EIR, like Colleen said, it was the same thing. Like you said, Randy, it was like, this is going to impact my income. So what am I going to do? So I immediately contacted the library and was like, I can do this virtually. We can do Zoom calls. I can call people on the phone if they don't want to do Zoom. Like, I need to find a way to keep this going because this is part of my income. So what am I going to do?
Sammy and I were like the first couple programs. So we had no idea what that was going to look like or be like. And we just kind of like tried it, and it's just worked out. And so everyone kind of in the different departments started doing programs too. And it was great.
Yeah, because with the program, with the programming, I have a whole calendar that's mapped out. And so then it was, are some of these presenters going to be willing to present on Zoom? Do they only want to present in person? Are they going to want to wait until the library opens? Because the library was closed indefinitely. So we had to navigate that whole thing. So then the first one we did was preparing your resume during the pandemic, right? What is the job market like? So that was our introduction into the Zoom workshops. And then for Sam's Word, my own personal business, I've been nonstop. So like Colleen, it's funny because Colleen's business is based online. It started online and that came to a halt. Sam's Word is virtual, right? So I have clients throughout the globe. And I thought at one point it was going to negatively impact it because I write for small business owners and for entrepreneurs. And a lot of small business owners are out of business or they don't have that income to pay for my services anymore. But I don't know what happened. That did not happen. So through the pandemic, my business just kept growing and growing. So first it started with adding social media management services to my business. Then in June, I started mentorship. And then in September, I'm going to continue mentorship and add coaching. So I have all that to get set up now. So
and I was going to say, like, with your topics, those changed and they sort of all became about Black Lives Matter, the pandemic, what was going on. Like, you know, everything kind of was really, really current. And it was great because a lot of our topics would be like, oh, this can be in September, this can be in October. It doesn't matter when it is. It's a general topic. And instead we were like, all right, like what are people experiencing now as small business owners and what do they need to hear? And Sammy came up with great ideas, had great speakers come, and it was just suddenly all about the current moment.
Now, Anne Marie, why don't you share with us how your business was affected by the pandemic?
Thank you, Randy. Hello, everybody. So I have been, let me talk about my business first, personally, my own business, which is consulting and training. And Randy, it was the same as yours. I've spent most of my time in schools with nonprofits and everything shut down and completely cut off my funding. So it was not a moment of panic for me though, because what I did is do what I always do, which is then volunteer. And so I found 3 or 4 organizations that I've been working with over the years that needed to step into this space during the time of the pandemic, that needed to be able to provide more service and did not have the capacity. And so I just switched to a giving role and to step into a leadership role. And so that's actually what happened with the Black Business Alliance. And as you know, many Black businesses have been very hard hit by the pandemic. And so helping the Black Business Alliance pivot in this moment has been crucial. It did not have the technology resources. It did not have the technical capacity. It did not have the same kind of leadership mindset that said we can quickly adjust like the libraries do, and we can just ramp up in social media like Sammy could, and we can just kind of switch. They did not have that capacity. So it needed a person to be able to step in and kind of bring some of those pieces together. It's been a long, slow walk, but it's happening. It's starting to happen. So I'm grateful for that. Having said that, I've just added kind of 2 new contracts in the last week, which came what would appear out of nowhere for my business. I'm not advertising, I'm not marketing, but people are calling. So it's a very unique opportunity right now in business.
So thank you, Anne Marie, because I think that leads right into what we talked about. And all of what you all shared kind of hits on these points where, you know, as James and I kind of refined what that is, we know that you have to give people things in these digestible small chunks, right? And so when you tell somebody to kind of do a checkup, right, and then see what the opportunity is, right? Because we can sit with, one of the things I had noticed early on when this happened is there was a lot of people who were kind of stuck because it's kind of like a pandemic is new for us, to James's point. None of us were here in 1918, so we don't have a frame of reference for this moment that we're in. And some people got stuck because, you know, they don't always know what to do. They can't, and they don't, to Anne Marie's point, don't always have the capacity, right? And that capacity could actually stop you, right? Like it can actually stop you from moving and stop you from growing. So as James and I were talking about, like, what's the checkup and how do you do this if you're not if you don't happen to be operating in a type of service or industry where you can kind of quickly pivot with all these capacity, with all this capacity, you don't have the people, you don't have the resources, there were a lot of people that didn't have great technology, right? There were a lot of people that didn't even have technology that would allow them to use something like Zoom, let alone be familiar with how to use Zoom, right? And then Zoom had to upgrade its platform significantly because they were not ready either, right? So do you remember the early Zoom compared to the Zoom now, right? Security issues, capacity issues, crashing, right? Like there were so many things Zoom wasn't ready for because it's been around for a long time, but people weren't using it, right? And so, you know, when James and I were thinking about what's that presentation we did some time ago, that was a little different because it was really related to, you know, being in a workplace and trying to grow, or leaving a workplace and trying to grow as an entrepreneur. You know, it's like these, what are those 3 things that we need to do as businesses so that we can actually seize the opportunity that's ahead, right? So the pandemic has also taken away something, but it also can be a gift of something that we can get from it.
I was gonna say for the Zoom,
yeah.
I should have, the opportunity I missed out on was buying stock for Zoom.
Buying stock, that's what I say every day when I wake up.
Oh my gosh.
And so, you know, those 3 things that you can do that we thought would be helpful for this conversation is to do an assessment of where you are, evaluate what's happening around you and the environment around you, and then figure out what's the opportunity and innovate, right? And so in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about what does that look like? What are the questions I would ask myself? How do I do that? And then at the end, James and I will talk about what's the opportunity to do that in a collaborative space so you don't have to do it alone. One of the biggest gifts from this pandemic is the collaborations. I met Anne Marie. I've gotten more intentional with my connection with Sammy. James and I had always had these things that we had going and ideas we had going, but we were always too busy to actually bring this talk to the library. This is actually something he and I discussed years ago, actually bringing this talk to the library. And I had not had the time to facilitate the relationship and the conversation for that to happen, right? I just didn't have the time because everything else going on. Because one of the things for me is the pandemic is by being in full day trainings, I couldn't do any of these. When I'm somewhere for 8 hours, I can't do a lunchtime talk. I can't do, because I am in New London or Hartford or Bloomfield or something for an entire day, right? And it takes me about an hour to get there and an hour to get home. So now we're talking about 10 hours, right? So in the pandemic, by going virtual, it has actually allowed me to support, you know, I had a client list already, but now some referrals are coming in and I'm actually able to say yes to some of those things because I don't have to travel for them, right? And I'm also, one of the things that I had always wanted to do was grow my brand outside of just training and to do more of the consulting stuff around
You
equity.
would say like with the pandemic that like,
yeah, so that has increased because my audience for that work are foundations, their foundation boards, their trustees. They were not individuals who would do things on Zoom, and now they have to. And so
I was gonna say oh, sorry.
Yes. So part of why I couldn't really grow that is I would be away for 8 hours. So I couldn't dedicate time to it. But my audience was not a group of people that did things virtually. And now they are.
And like, it's like you said, necessary. It really became necessary. Like my dad owns a small business and I had to teach him how to, like, he had to sign up on Wix and start selling online because he had to shut his shop down. And it was like, he never would have had the impetus to do that. It was always something he like wanted to do, but he didn't have the time to do. And you're right. Like once you have the time with the pandemic, it was like, how am I going to use this time? So it sounds very similar to what he experienced.
So now we're going to go through like those 3 steps in a little bit more detail, like what's the questions you would ask yourself. And I'm just going to turn it over to James to go through that. I'm going to move my thing over here. So the first step is to assess, right?
So before jumping into this slide, a couple of things I just wanted to highlight that many of you probably just know because you're entrepreneurs, but as entrepreneurs, you think quick on your feet, right? You look for ways to be flexible, right? And you're not sort of stuck into like any one way of doing things, right? And that's a blessing as an entrepreneur. So, and you have a very different mindset than an employee working for a company, because you have to really be on your game. You have to be staying connected with different sources, right, with your networks to really understand what's happening, so that you might have to tweak some things the day of, because it's not just going in to make the donuts, right? You have to kind of go and think about a lot of different things as you maneuver. So as we talk about the assessment piece, right, we go back to every event or every day, something can happen, right? And when those things happen, the event occurs, right? But what do? You assess, right? You evaluate, and then you come up with some ways to get around those things. So we call it innovating, right? But usually when the event occurs that you have to deal with, because you can't not deal with it, right? You just can't, because your business relies on it. So in the case of Anne-Marie, she said, things got shut down. I lost contracts, right? She had to think, okay, how do I pivot, right? So she went through that assess, she evaluated, right? And then she said, here's my approach. I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to give, right? And that was her pathway forward. And that began to take hold. And so now that's a new pathway that she has that she might not have taken had this not have happened. She might have at some point in time, but it wouldn't have happened at this current point in time, if that makes sense. So when we talk about assessing, right, there are some reflective questions like, where am I now, right? What's changed, right? And what's changed in how I need to conduct my business or offer my services, right? So going back to, so in the case of Sammy, she was like, I'm already in a digital space, so I can do a lot more. It's much easier for me to maneuver in this world because I launched my business in that realm. But if you are a realtor selling real estate, it's very different, right? So when you're out there, you have your list of referrals and leads, right? People are coming into you, you're going into houses. Now it's like, well, person that wants to sell a house or buy a house, you're very leery about walking into that house, or the prospective buyer doesn't want to walk into that house. So what does the realtor do? They offer virtual, open houses using technologies like Zoom, right? So we're seeing these examples.
That's how I found my new apartment. I had to virtually find it.
That's great.
But it worked out great.
Yes. And so when we think about assessing, right, we're thinking about impact to our business. How do we change our model? Like how do we change? Because if we don't change, we know that there's doom, right? We know if we don't change, we know what's not going to happen, right? We can't generate that income. So these questions sort of come to mind. It might be top of mind for many, but for some, panic sets in and you never really get a chance to do that self-reflection, right? So we talk about these few questions are really important. There's probably a lot more that you might go through at that point in time. And I'm not saying that the assess is a defined period, but there is a moment where you have to sort of think about how these questions or how that impact is affecting you. So we talk about it in this context of assess. Make sense? All right.
Yeah. So you want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Moving into the next slide, right? Now that we've kind of assessed what we think we are, we're doing some brainstorming, right? We now want to think about, okay, first question might come to say, well, can I do the same offering as I did before, right? So if I'm a salon owner, right, I know that I can't do virtual hair, right? So I have to be physically there, right? So I can't just jump into Zoom and say, okay, I'm gonna, do this one client's hair that way. I need to think about what needs to happen in my space, in my location, so that if I'm going to offer my service, which is not digital oriented, right? It's really more so face-to-face interaction. I got to think about how do I provide the safeguards such that clients will want to come to my business, presuming that, the state has said it's okay to do this and not be, and you're not doing things that might be going against the grain of where the businesses are. So if we're in stage 2, a lot of the businesses like salons and barbershops were allowed to reopen based on certain safeguards. So they introduced this whole new protocol, right? They made sure that there was, social distancing inside the space. They would do more appointments versus just drop-ins. So they found ways to adapt. So the evaluation phase is really about where you're thinking about, what do I need to tweak, right? How do I reintroduce my offering in order for me to continue to do business, right? And we also know that because you don't have that you don't have the ability to have folks just drop in when they want to drop in, right? You had to rethink that. So instead of servicing, let's say 20 clients a day, maybe you're only servicing 10, right? Or you're trying to find ways to make that up, but at least you're seeing some revenue coming in, and you can make some adjustments around your business model to figure out, well, how do I now increase my volume in a safe way, right? So
Can I say, I saw this in real time. I have a friend that owns a salon, and
yes,
she's very vocal on Facebook about like her experience with the pandemic, and she had just opened the salon and she had to close her doors, and she was waiting and waiting and waiting to open again, and she was on unemployment and she was really freaking out. And people, that need didn't go away. In fact, it increased. So when she was able to open again, she had to like basically said, I can't take any more appointments because I have so many regular customers that have been waiting and waiting and waiting for these services that I'm booked. Like she was really grateful at the end of all that panic, but you can't plan on when is this going to be over.
Right.
So, you know, she was lucky that they let her open again. And it just goes to show like the demand never went away. It actually increased for her.
Yes. And I think to your point, I know that I have, my friend and barber, I didn't go to his shop, right? But I know that in that meantime, there were certain clients where he was willing to go to their place of residence, but he would have, a face shield and a mask and gloves, right? So at least, so for him, he felt he was willing to take on that risk, but he properly, prepared himself to go in, and that just helped him again to reduce some of that loss until he can actually open up his shop and then be able to have folks come through on a more regular basis, if that makes sense.
I also know a salon owner, Lavina, here in New Haven. She started selling like hair brushes for like natural hair and hair products and like bonnets, and she would deliver them. So, you place your order, and then, she put a little upcharge so she can make a little bit income also.
Right.
But being able to creatively pivot during that time.
Yes. And to your point, Sammy, because of the digital technology, because we have the ability to do that, it makes entrepreneurs that much more flexible, right, to make those adjustments, right? Because if you're not digitally enabled, you have to become, a quick study literally overnight, right? In order to save your business, right? And so, yes, but when we talk about, these scenarios, right, these questions are really, again, about helping you to make the appropriate modifications that will enable you to stay connected to your business, right? To basically weather the storm, right? And then when the storm is over, that you can thrive. And so we hope that that's what happens, and that, because we know that there will be some casualties, right? That is part of it, but it's not because, it could be because of situations beyond, that business owner's control, right? But if you're able to kind of weather the storm and to get on the other side, right, you put things in place that helps you manage that situation, right? So evaluation is really critical. And I know for many, it happens on a daily basis. So there are these sort of larger sort of discussions around planning, right? But we're talking here like minute to minute, hour to hour kinds of things, right?
Absolutely.
Because you have to be kind of quick. And so the evaluation might be, you talking to your business partner or significant other or best friend, but there's someone that you're sort of thinking about as you begin to evaluate your options. So it's really about evaluating your options, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's also like continuously doing that. So
Yes.
just constantly reiterating and seeing, you pilot something, you test it out, you see what's happening. If you need to quickly switch and go plan B, then do that. But as long as you're constantly thinking that it's not like a one-time thing, like, okay,
Right.
pandemic came, let me sit down and think about this, let me implement this, and I'm done. You may have to keep doing that.
That's
yeah,
right.
Sammy, that's really true for the library, especially. We've had to do like, okay, this is step one, but we might have to pull back. You know, we're doing curbside service, and that was a big planning thing. Like, how are we going to give these physical books? How long do they have to get quarantined? Are we going to have appointments? Are people going to come in the building? Are they going to come in this room? Like, how many people capacity? It was such a nightmare. It was such a long process. And so once we started offering the services, there was always that caveat of like, we might have to pull back on this if it's not working, or if we see some issues with people wearing masks, or if we see too many issues with the books or something. And so now we're really excited because we're doing the computer lab. And that was another really nerve-wracking thing, because it was like, there are so many computers, they're all set up really close to each other. How are we going to manage this? And people figured it out. We got the plexiglass on the desks. They have a chat now function. So if the person's across the room, instead of them coming up to the desk and them going to the computer, they chat and they say, this is the problem I'm having on the computer, or we do the printing for them, and you have to call for an hour appointment and you can only stay for an hour. And so there were all these rules that had to get implemented, but it was like, we needed to do this service. So we had to figure out how to do it.
Right.
I
And
think
it's
I'm
like
glad.
James said,
Go ahead, Kimmy.
no, I was gonna say, it's like James says, we have the technology now, right? We have these resources that are at our disposal, and people are innovating every day, and new things are constantly being created. You know, I hear people say, just imagine if this happened in the 80s, the 90s, like, what would we do? And it's like, of all the things to be, you know, depressed about and what's not going our way, it's also time to be grateful that we have these resources available.
Absolutely.
And learn.
Imagine if you didn't have an iPhone.
Well,
Just
I'm glad
imagine.
I'm glad you mentioned two things, Sammy. You mentioned iterative process, and you mentioned feeling also looking at this not as a moment of loss, but also as a moment of opportunity. So when James and I was preparing for this conversation, well, first I want to speak to the iterative piece. So James and I have a background in technology, and it's something that we as technologists, that's what drives the way that we do our work. However, we know working with other groups, you know, particularly nonprofits, I'll say, who are, we always did it this way. We do it this way. We always did it this way. Or groups of people who are waiting for the one right answer before they try something. And so, you know, while we all on this call have been very used to that way of being, James and I understand that this is also an opportunity for a culture shift for other people who don't think iteratively and who also don't think of, let me bring something to market, try it and refine it, right? Like as people who have a history of IT work, that is the bedrock of what we do, right? Like we don't know how to think, and that's probably one of the skill sets I would say that we've brought the most value to the work that we do outside of IT is bringing that methodology to other groups, because in our experience, that is not how people think of themselves, but we also want to encourage entrepreneurs to think of themselves as that way. Don't get
Absolutely.
stuck on the one thing you offer. It's like, this is the thing I offer and that's it, right? Like it really is, what are some things that we can try, right? Yes, we don't have this, we're in a pandemic and we can't do this, but what can we do, right? Like what are some of the things we can do, and let's try those. And I know that, you know, we're like the choir on this call, but we are very aware that there are a lot of people who are really in a place of uncertainty, don't know where they're gonna go next, right? And that we want to take this opportunity to say, you know, look at this video,
Right.
right?
Right.
Look at this and start to shift your mindset of how do you think of yourself as an entrepreneur, especially if you're a fee-for-service contractor. You don't have a team, you ain't got a whole bunch of people behind you, it's just you. And so you need to think about, you know, what do I have now? Can I do those same things? Do I need to transition to online? Do I need to change my method of delivery? Are there some adjustments I need to make, right? Because I am the only person here. You know, I'm the company of one, and I'm the whole company, right? And so given that scenario, like, what is it that I need to be doing and taking this inventory of myself, and not just because I know businesses do it, but individuals don't do that for themselves about who they are and what they offer, right? And what can they bring to the world. And so this is an opportunity as we go into like the next slide to really like, what's the innovation part, right? Like, how do I innovate? Because Sammy talked about being iterative, right? You talked about for the library about how the library has constantly like been figuring out ways around the barriers, right? Like, and all this, but what do people do who don't have all of that, right? Like, how do they innovate, right? And that's where you have to kind of say, all right, let's do a survey scan. Like, what's out there? What are the new and emerging opportunities, right? Do I need to build capacity, right? Because some people they're not ready to grow. They don't have the tools. They don't have the resources to grow. Do I need to do that? And then I think the most poignant point of all of this is the partnerships and collaborations. We've always worked in isolation, right? We go about our day, we get up, start business is what we do. You know, Anne-Marie and a group of us who do kind of training around social justice work have been meeting on the side to figure out, we're all across the state doing these things in our silos. Is there an opportunity for us to partner, support each other, and collaborate, right? And I think this pandemic has brought us to a place of that's not only something to think about, but it's actually a necessary component of surviving this pandemic. I don't think
people miss other people.
Yeah, I don't think you
social.
can move, right? Because it's literally like, if you look at the hair salon scenario, right? If I can't go to a hair salon, or if I have clients who aren't willing to come to a hair salon anymore, like Lavina had a great model, but somebody else who isn't tech savvy doesn't have that skill set. They don't have the capacity. They don't even have the setup. So do they partner and collaborate with a tech savvy person, right? To get that, and what are some natural collaborations that can come from that? Because that's I don't see us navigating through this. Because when it first happened, I was one of those people who thought, a month or two of this, we'll be back, right? And so, you know, I have the physical space on Willow Street, and I've had to face the fact that we're not going to have people having events there the way that we've had them there for a very long time, right? And that literally was floating our rent. And so, you know, for us, we've had to refine our model, like our business model, right? So we have people who want to do podcasts out of there weekly, which is just a small group of people, and the space is 1,300 square feet, so they can do that, right? So our audience is going to change significantly. What we use the space for is going to change significantly, right? Right now we have, we partnered with the New Haven Early Childhood Council, Yale New Haven Hospital, and the city of New Haven. And right now it's a place where all the child care centers in New Haven are picking up their PPE supplies from. So right now, that's what that space is using for, but that's not even things we would have been doing before, right? And so, and it's been collaborations. It's like a collaboration with the city of New Haven, the collaboration with the, you know, New Haven Early Childhood Council. So there's a big piece of this around really like there's a huge group of both business owners in New Haven, because New Haven is a place like that where there's a lot of small business owners that are just themselves individual businesses who, because of what they used to offer, are looking at surviving as very different. And these are the questions they need to be asking themselves about innovation, right? What are the new and emerging opportunities?
I love that, and I think it's like learning from each other. And I love that you put that in there. Yeah.
So James, you want to expand on this a little bit more, because we're getting to time.
Sure. So quickly, so innovating is really about reimagining. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you reimagine, you're exploring opportunities. And that's when the light bulbs, which is why we have this light bulb there, that's when the light bulbs go off, right? When you say, okay. And so now I have, I have this idea, right? Now I need to figure out, how can I bring it to fruition, right? It might mean that I need to expand in some way, or grow in some way, or pick up this new capability. Maybe it's, I don't have enough of a social media presence, as an example, right? Or if I don't have that skill, right, maybe I partner with, as Randy said, maybe I partner with someone who has, the skills to create that digital presence for me, and we work out some arrangement, right? So it's the partnering idea that helps, because that enables you to expand, right? Where if your strength is around your offering, right, then okay, you partner with someone that you can trust they provide that capability for you. So now you've grown just because, right? And now you're moving in this new direction. And once you begin to move in that new direction, you're basically, you've charted some new territory, because now you are no longer what you were prior to. You are much better. You're improved. You're enhanced, right? Those connections allow you to do what? Provide, or maybe look for some additional opportunities, maybe through that partnership, right? So innovating is essential. But I do say that entrepreneurs do this almost, like in their sleep. It's just what you do. It's part of your DNA in many instances. But oftentimes it's not called out as such, and you need to have that sort of look in the mirror and say, hey, this is what you do. You do this really well. You need that sort of boost to let you know that, yeah, things are tough right now, but you're still floating, you're still moving, right? And because you have reimagined, right, you now are positioned to take advantage of some new opportunities as they present themselves. Because now, again, you weren't there prior to, because you weren't, nothing prompted you to move into this new space. I'm reminded of that old saying that, how does it go? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? The need to do something, right? The need to survive, the need to, provide services to your business causes you, drives you to reimagine and to innovate, if that makes sense.
And I think it's a lot about getting outside your comfort zone. That was
Yes.
something I reckoned with when this was happening. And I know other people who are entrepreneurs have too, but I know that you're right. That's a strength of entrepreneurship in general. Like if you're an entrepreneur, you're pretty good at getting outside your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, I thank you for mentioning that about getting outside of your comfort zone, because part of getting outside of your comfort zone is once you kind of go through that process, you need a sounding board, right? Like we live in our heads a lot. And sometimes, I always say this to people, and I don't mean it in any other way than just honest feedback and support, but I wake up every day with great ideas, but they're usually for me, right? I be coming up with all kinds of stuff, right? But that does not necessarily mean that it's a viable business or product or service that there's a demand for, right? So you need to, once you kind of reassess and reimagine, this new thing you would do or this way you would grow what you already offer, you want to talk to someone as a sounding board to say, hey, how does this sound? Is this something you would use? Do you know people who would use it, right? Like that's a lot of times that is missing through our little process that we go through. It's a great idea to us, sounds great to us. And the next day we're filing LLCs and we're starting stuff and we're moving forward, right? And I learned that with my first party business, right? Like, I liked doing parties, and when I used to go to people and do them, that was one thing. When I had a business, a storefront to sustain, that was a whole other thing. The amount of parties I would have needed to have to still be open today was impossible with the staff that I had, right? And I didn't have the capital to grow my staff. And people don't have parties Monday through Thursday.
And now in the pandemic, no one's having a party.
And no one's having a party
right,
at all, right? So I probably, if I had a party facility, it would not be open to me. So, but it was a great idea in my head. But, had I been more diligent in my research, I would have said, okay, well, maybe we need to think about this a little differently. And so you need someone as a sounding board. And then when James and I were having this conversation preparing, we also realized like you might need some help. And so we have some help on the phone, on this call, right? So those of you who are watching this presentation later, right, there's 4 people on this call that is a good resource who offer professional services to help you get through this. I will say myself much less because I'm less likely to be available, but I know Sammy's starting her coaching thing in September. The library, that's a great resource. James is an awesome resource. He's worked with many organizations in New Haven, NAACP, the Sickle Cell Association, to really refine their model. And as a result, the Sickle Cell Association is opening their first sickle cell house in New Haven. I watched James over the years put a significant amount of work into that project. And now that project is now real, right? And there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears along the way on that project. So I think there's a good resource on this call that can help with that. And then James and I also talked about, in a few weeks, if there's interest, convening, a very informal session where we can collaborate and talk in a virtual space, because we can't do networking in person again, but we can talk in a virtual way to kind of have people say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm struggling with, right? And create these informal spaces online that we used to have physically with networking to actually could facilitate some of that, that sounding board element, but also can some natural partnerships and collaborations evolve from that. Sammy can tell you, I texted her as early as 7 o'clock this morning about a meeting I had last night on something that's coming up in the fall, which directly aligned with her launching her coaching thing. So when that call came to me yesterday and had that meeting, I was like, I'm going to go to sleep for now, but I'm going to email her first thing in the morning and tell her about it. And so those are those partnerships and collaborations which have just been coming, right? Like they've just been coming, and it's only because her and I have crossed paths in a virtual space that those things are evolving, right? And so we want to help people. We want to facilitate those intentional spaces for people, because I would say, even though we naturally do this as entrepreneurs, the intentionality is so. When James and I did this talk at Yale, we talked a lot about strategy. So when he and I first started talking about this, it's been at least 5 or 6 years now. We were very intentional about our product. We started talking about what we saw was missing, and we saw people didn't have a strategy. They didn't have a strategy. You have a good idea, you got something you really, 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 really want, but you need an effective strategy so that it can become more of a reality. And over the years, I've known James and working with him at the university and outside of the university, that is the significant contribution that he makes. He gets people organized and thinking strategically about what they're gonna do.
And that's what Sammy does, and it's about accountability.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like you need that accountability to like make yourself keep going. So
yeah. So
I think
Sammy
you're
was
right.
gonna say something, and then James, I'll let you kind of close us out.
Sure.
I also wanted to plug the library when you talk about the research on the other slide. Gina Bingham, who managed, what is Gina's title, Colleen?
Sorry. She is the business and social media manager, and she's the manager of the I've Squared space, which is where we have the exchange, and that is the business part of the library, the entrepreneur part of the library that's putting on this event.
Yes. So when you talk about doing your research and is this a viable business, are there people who's going to buy it? Gina was on Known Co-working on Facebook Live this morning. I saw that too. And she was talking about a resource called Intellect that the library has. So
it's called Mergent Intellect.
Oh, there you go.
It's Mergent Intellect, and we just got it, and it's actually really exciting. And I'm sure she explained more in depth about what it is, but we do have databases that you can do market research on for free, and it's a much better situation than a Google search, and it's pretty easy to learn. And you can find invaluable information through some of the business databases we have.
Yes, and then I also want to touch on the topic of getting around people, having that sounding board, investing in a coach or mentor, because there's just something natural that happens in conversations with like minds. And it's very different from saying I'm in a Facebook group and let me write this in my comment. When you have that engaged in-person or virtual conversation, there's ideas that just develop, and as entrepreneurs we're always thinking. And so that's why I like the coaching and the mentoring, because I get on the phone. I was on the phone with someone this morning, and she was just like, I have a ton of questions, I need a lot of direction, and I don't know where to go. And by the end of a 30-minute call, she had actionable items, because I can listen to her and I can say, this is what you need to do. And it doesn't benefit me in any way, right? This is just her and what she needs to get to the next step, because she's just stuck. So when you surround yourself with the right people, I think that's really important too. When you're in business and getting into business, you can't just say, I'm going to talk to my homegirls that I go to the club with. I'm going to go talk to my auntie and my cousins, because
They're all gonna love your product and tell you you're
Yes,
great.
absolutely, they're supposed to.
Okay,
right.
but are they giving you the right information? Are they going to tell you, no, don't do that? And so so you got to surround yourself with those collaborations and those partnerships and that community of people who are in the same mind space as you. And you'll start to understand that. And I hear it all the time. People have these conversations about their business or what they want to do, or they have questions, and the people in their circle can't help them at all. So then they start looking outside and say, what can I do then to, to get around the people who can help me?
And I think for me, and then I'll let James kind of take it away, but I think for me also thinking about it is, it actually fuels my energy. So I mentioned before how Anne-Marie and I and another group of us who do racial justice work have been convening. And it started out as what's partnerships and collaborations, but we've also evolved into a support for each other, right? Because a lot of times as an entrepreneur, you're so immersed in your work and you're alone. You need that network to keep you going. It inspires you, right? Like when you see someone else being able to navigate the pandemic, you're like, oh, I might be able to do this, where you might not have been thinking that before because you've been kind of by yourself. So you want to tap into these networks that are not just your family members, not just your friends, but other professionals on the grind like you, on the hustle like you, who you can get some inspiration from, get some of that energy from. And then there might be opportunities to partner and collaborate. James, I'm going to stop talking and let you.
Well, no, I think to your point, just going back to this whole notion about strategy, right? Mm-hmm. You live your strategy day in, day out. Mm-hmm. And there's this opportunity when you start to think about these moving parts, right? I always think about these analogies and these symbolisms. So I think about the chessboard, right? And I think as an entrepreneur, I think about, the business landscape as a chessboard. What moves do I need to make strategically, right? So that I can win the game, right? So winning the game means that I'm getting my brand out there, I'm growing my business, I'm meeting some contacts, I'm doing some various things, right? And sometimes I may have to sacrifice, a piece on the board to get something else, right? But when I do, you're doing that because it's being thoughtful, right? So the strategy is really integral to all that you do, right? And just be mindful of that daily, because that's who you are as entrepreneurs. And I think when we talk about seeking professional help or coaching help, right, part of that is to help people understand that, yes, you have strengths, you have weaknesses, right? But that's okay, because there are opportunities, right? And so one will say, okay, yeah, continue to build on your strengths, and for your weaknesses, let's look for ways to strengthen that by looking at collaborations or thinking about getting some new capabilities into place, right? But it's really about keeping strategy at the forefront of what you do as you navigate, right? We're navigating that. We're in this big, COVID ocean, and we're navigating these waters, right? So we need all these things to kind of help us to kind of stay afloat and move forward. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to end with this quote because it resonated with me. I just did I just released my second journal for this year, which is during the season, I did more of a personal reflective journal. And my first client for them was actually Yale University, which was quite shocking. But but now I just did my second one that's more for people like me who work independently on projects. And there's quotes in between the project pages, et cetera. And this is one of the ones that resonates with me the most. And it's opportunities don't happen, you create them. And so I want to leave people with that as something to reflect on at the end of this conversation, and say to feel free to reach out to James, myself, Samantha, or Colleen as a resource. We are definitely interested in supporting businesses who might find, or entrepreneurs who might find this topic relevant to them, as well as need a sounding board or professional coach or mentor to help guide them through what's next for them. We've heard some success stories on this call, but we do know there are some people out there struggling. And so we want to say that hopefully you found these stories of success inspiring to you. And if you need to walk through the process of getting to that, of what success would look like for you, we're here for you. So feel free to reach out to us, and we hope that this presentation
What would be the best way to reach out to you guys?
Reach out to us.
Yeah.
I'm on social media as all things my name, because I love my name. And you can see the pictures and everything. I am a social butterfly in that way. James is less much a social butterfly.
That
so
is true. That is true.
You can definitely find him on LinkedIn. He does have a profile on LinkedIn, and you can always reach out to me and I can connect you to James. But and then Sammy can find both of us, and so can Colleen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even I can get you in touch with all three of these people. If you want to just go to I've Squared, you can also use my email. It's very easy. It's clynch@nhfpl.org. And I can get you in touch with whoever
you need a LinkedIn picture.
Me?
He does have one. You might be looking at the wrong profile. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have a LinkedIn.
Who doesn't have a LinkedIn?
I know. I'm so bad. I know.
A topic for another discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I know Sammy did a workshop on that recently, right? You did a workshop.
Oh yeah, she knows all the ins and outs. I got to talk to Sammy.
Yeah. I think she did a workshop. So how you don't have one is amazing. But anyway, so you can find us through Colleen or Sammy, and we would be happy to continue this conversation. And we do hope this was helpful to you. And thank you very much for listening to us.